My name is Joe Thomas.
Junior.
No talking.
I'm the son of Bessie Manning Thomas. Her father was named Tom Manning. We have an old historian that lives in our vicinity whose name is Charles Wadley, who gave us supposedly an accurate account of the Manning family. It was told that in 1851, there was a Caucasian man that lived in Oklahoma, that left Oklahoma and came to Texas. His name was Mark Manning. And when he came to Texas, he brought with him 6 slave families from Oklahoma to Texas. And they resided 6 miles out of Richard over here on the Wadley farm. I had an opportunity to visit Mr. Wadley. He even gave me a sketch of the graveyards where the slaves used to bury, where we can't go to. And he gave me a diagram where all the cabinets used to be what the slaves lived in. They came to Texas in 1851, and the reason Mark Manning brought them to Texas, he was 101 years old when he came to Texas. And his health was failing him. And he had one daughter. His wife was named Barbara Ann Walters, and his daughter was named Ann Manning. The daughter left Oklahoma and came to Texas and married a man named John Welch. And Mark Manning wanted to spend his last days with his daughter because his health was failing him. And he was also in trouble with the law in Oklahoma, the territory of Oklahoma. So he migrated and came to Texas with the slave families. In Texas and in Louisiana and Mississippi and the other southern states, it was against the law for a slave to read or write. But Oklahoma didn't become a state until 1907. And in Oklahoma, it was a territory. And there was different rules and regulations for slaves. There was some part of Oklahoma that blacks was never slaves, the home of the Buffalo Soldiers. But anyway, when they came to Texas and they freed the slaves in 1865, this Native American woman that Bob Manning married was an Indian. She was a Creek Indian that he married. And they had that one daughter, and she came and married Mr. Welton. And it is believed we don't have the name of their master, which was Manning. And all the slaves that he owned bore the name Manning. And when they freed them, some of them went back to Oklahoma, some went to Montgomery Way, and some of them resided in Grimes County. The Manning men were great, big, strong men. They stood better than 6 feet tall. They were big, tall, and black.
I was doing good at first.
There wasn't no light cut skin Manning. They were strong men. Now, in my grandfather's generation, he was born in 1866. He was born 1 year after slavery, after the slaves were freed. But a lot of the Manning men, what made them be so close, they had the same father, but they didn't have the same mother. Back in those days, a man lived in whatever cabin his master told him to live in. So a lot of the men were brothers and sisters. They had the same father, but they had different mothers. It's a very ugly story. They were slaves. The men that was in my grandfather's generation had a one-word name. There wasn't no 2 words in his name. His name was either Tom, Jack, Prince, George, Randall, or Jerry, or whatever. They had one word name. They didn't really marry in those days. The strong men just slept in whatever cabinet the master told them to sleep in. Because they wanted big, strong, healthy children. And if a man didn't grow big and was kind of a short man or small, most times he would be sold. That's why the married men was so big. However, these fellas here, their grandfather and my grandfather, both of them stood better than 6 feet tall. They were big, strong men. The names of the women wasn't mentioned. Mostly the names of the men was mentioned. They didn't mention the names of the women. And the men didn't have no permanent place to stay. He stayed wherever they told him to stay. The story goes on. And some things was not told. But Oklahoma became a state. It was one of the last places to become a state. It became a state in 1907. And Texas became a state in 1845, I believe it was. Oklahoma was the last one to come in. And the reason a lot of the slaves went back to Oklahoma because in some places in Oklahoma, that's the home of the Buffalo Soldiers. They had a territory up there what black people took over in Oklahoma. It was a gold rush. It was a place if you was bad enough, you could pretty well stand on your own. So some of the runaway slaves and the ones that refused to be enslaved, they went back to Oklahoma. We always have had people, even during slavery, that stood up, fought for their right. They couldn't enslave them. They were runaway slaves. My grandfather and his boys grew up. My mother told me that they grew up and they needed some wedges to build a rail fence. They didn't have wild fences. Fences used to be built out of rail. My mother said, my grandfather said they wanted to split some rails and they didn't have no money to buy no iron wedges. And so their daddy told them, said, I know where plenty of iron wedges are.
Railroad.
Asked him, so where are they? He told them, at the corner of a fence, over by a big old tree. Dig down there and said, because I buried them during slavery. And they sent me to work. I buried the wedges and told the boss man somebody stole them. Yeah, some slaves wouldn't work. This Manning man was an outlaw in Oklahoma. He was, not only was his health bad, but he was running from the law when he came to Texas. And he trained his slaves to help him. I don't like to tell that I don't want to throw no reflection on nobody. But to say them Mannings was some slick fellas. One reason white folks ran away from over there. They were bad influence to the other slaves. Yeah. It's the same way today. Those of us that are knowledgeable, we have a hard time. I was listening to 2 teachers standing out there talking today about the problem they were having at school and with the administrators and different things. And when you try to be successful, you have to fight. The odds is against you. We still have a fight on hand. What we need to do as a family is to get together and work together and pray together and stay together and keep fighting each other and help one another. Right. We got a long way to come. You see, in slavery, the master didn't whoop no slave. He made another slave tie him up. And then he would tell that slave how many times he did. And the reason they beat some slaves to death is because they wouldn't cry. You want to whoop him until he cried. Some men would die and wouldn't cry. They would be on the hanging pole The man would beat them to death and they wouldn't cry. They just wouldn't do it. Some of them just wouldn't give in, although they were slaves. The way a white man does now, if he want to do something to me, he'll get another black man to help him. That came from slavery. We ain't got past that yet. One slave whooping another. And the way we do now, one black man fighting another black man. I don't agree with Farrakhan what he said about Jesus and all that, but one thing I do agree with him when he said we need to help one another. Right. Farrakhan said some good things. I don't agree with his philosophy about who Christ was, but he said as black people, we need to work together and support one another and help one another and quit fighting each other and lying on each other and making it hard for each other, but we need to help one another. So when you look at the whole spectrum of the whole picture, we come from a long way, but we got a long way to go. Do y'all hear me? We were slaves. We were sold. He took the people's children and sold them away from their children. Women was crying with a child standing on a block being auctioned off like an animal or a cow. We got past that. Since the Lord has blessed us so, I think we need to do better than what we're doing. All right. We need to get off of that dope and get some hope. All right. All right. We need to stop stealing to get us a job. All right. We need to go to the universities and educate ourselves and apply ourselves where we can make a living. We need to do better than what we're doing. We have lost this last generation. Our young men don't have sense enough to pull their pants up. All right. Got the cap turned toward on their head and it's got a beard on it. Supposed to be warm. I was at the prison the other night. A young man told me he wanted to rap. I told him, you rap your way in here. We need to sing praises. All right. We need to pray. We need to find a way to please God. We need as a people and as a black race, we need to possess some high moral standards. Right. We need to stand for something. Right. I'd like to say something to you young people. Y'all need to marry. Right. We're having all these children out of wedlock. Right. Y'all need to quit shacking. Y'all may not like me after this speech is over. That's all right. Go ahead. We need to possess high moral standards. We don't need to live together and run from woman to woman, brothers, like a community stud home. That's right. We need to marry and be men of integrity and have families and fear God and do what God said do. That's right. We can do better. We can do better. They took slaves and they built the White House. Yeah. Thank God they got a slave running the White House. Amen. It ain't no limit to what we can do if we apply ourselves. We don't have to be on the bottom no more. We can rise. Do y'all hear me? All right. Well. We don't have to be the lowest thing on the totem pole. We can rise up and stand up and speak up and get up. Yes. Be somebody that white man has to look to. We don't have to run to him and tell him everything. He ain't going to tell you nothing, but we run to him and tell him everything. That's true. We need to wake up. We need to wake up. We need to rise up. We need to stand up. And we need to speak up. And we need to take our rightful place in society. Thank God for the Mannions.
Amen.
Thank God for the Mannions. They come from a long way. We may have a long way to go, but we come from a long way. I'm soliciting your prayer to pray for me. I do prison ministry. I've been doing prison ministry for 17 years. I would like to tell y'all this in my closing. Y'all quit preparing your children for prison.